Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Let's take a look at today's top stories. President Biden is facing mounting pressure from Congress over his plans to revive the Iranian nuclear deal. Democrats and Republicans say it could enrich Iran, help Russia, and put the free world in danger. We'll tell you why. Who's to blame for the soaring gas prices? Today, Democrats grilled executives from big oil companies, while Republicans say it's Biden's fault. We'll bring you more from a heated congressional hearing. We sit down with President and CEO of Domestic Energy Producers Alliance, Jerry Simmons, to look for practical solutions to get America back on the road of energy independence. President Biden says he's working to apply maximum pressure on Russia, but cutting off Russian oil means there's a void to fill for oil in the global market. The White House has asked Iran to ramp up their oil production to help fill that void. This as the administration inches closer to reviving the Iranian nuclear deal. But this has lawmakers from both sides of the aisle concerned. NTD's Melina Wisecup is at the Capitol to break this down for us. Melina, what can you tell us?
Basically, this Iran nuclear deal that the White House is working to revive right now is meant to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, placing restrictions on them, while in exchange, the U.S. will lift sanctions on Iran. And we heard from House Republicans and House Democrats today who say they're concerned that by lifting these sanctions, it could enrich the regime, but not only that, it could also embolden terrorists. Here's why.
Iran, strengthened with billions of dollars in sanctions relief, would be an enormous danger to Americans at home and abroad and to our allies. It would weaken our fight against terror.
When their lips are moving, they're lying. And they have given us nothing to indicate that that has changed.
In summary, I think that we cannot afford another failed agreement.
So that House Democrat we just heard from is on the Armed Services Committee, and she specifically says that she supports former President Trump's maximum pressure approach to this Iran nuclear deal. So one concern that these lawmakers from both parties had is that they're getting very little information about how these negotiation talks are unfolding, which they say is an issue.
I don't know exactly what's in this deal. I can't tell you because they haven't allowed us to look at it.
But Republicans really zeroed in and emphasized the fact that Russia is sitting at that negotiation table right now. And these Republicans say they're concerned that if this deal is met, it will allow Russia and Iran to tighten their relations, and then Iran could help Russia get around those sanctions that Western countries and President Biden are imposing on Russia right now. Let's listen.
Allowing Russia to build for $10 billion the nuclear power plant in Iran, to get around the very sanctions we're implementing on them right now for their actions in Ukraine.
Where Iran has the rest of the globe in a situation, and the United States, this administration, trying to get their hands on their oil.
And I asked Representative Gottheimer how unified Republicans and Democrats are on this issue. He says that while everybody does have their personal concerns, both parties are unified around the fact that they want to do everything they can to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And then when we heard from Republicans later, the top Republican voice on the Foreign Affairs Committee says that he believes they do have enough Democrats who are willing to join with Republicans to reverse any potential deal that could have severe consequences. Steve, back to you.
NTD's Melina Wisecup at the Capitol. And the clash continues over who's to blame for the high gas prices. Is it Putin, Biden, or big oil? NTD's Iris Tao brings us more from a heated hearing today where it all played out.
We're here to get answers from the big oil companies about why they're ripping off the American people.
Blaming oil companies for high fuel prices, House Democrats grilled executives of Exxon, Chevron, and other industry leaders in a Wednesday hearing.
These prices are straining our constituents' budgets and their patience.
But oil executives denied the charges that they're utilizing energy shortfalls to boost profits.
Shell does not set or control the price of crude oil.
We do not control the market price of crude oil.
No single company sets the price of oil or gasoline.
They said the high gas prices stem from shortages driven first by a rebound of demand and later by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And these market dynamics, they said, are not controlled by the companies.
And we have no tolerance for price gouging.
The White House has been criticizing oil companies for not using enough permits to drill, but Republicans say it's Biden's energy policies that have created a hostile environment for them to do so.
All of these federal agencies putting mountains of red tape on every American driller, making it harder to drill in America.
Meanwhile, the oil executives told lawmakers that they're facing a variety of challenges just like other sectors. That includes worker shortages, high prices, and supply constraints, all of which they said are hindering their ability to ramp up production. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
When referring to high gas prices, the White House keeps calling it Putin's price hike, but Republicans say that's not accurate. Here's what Senator LANKFORD said earlier today.
This is not a result of Putin's war. This is a result of Biden policies, and everyone knows it.
The national average today is about $4.20 compared to around $2.90 just a year ago. The gas price hiked to $3.50 before the war started 2 months ago. Biden is spurring record amounts of emergency oil reserves. Democrats are also calling for less fossil fuel to get out of this situation. Republicans have a different solution.
There is a way to produce more American energy. There is a way to be able to bring prices down.
More than 20 states are considering gas tax holidays and rebates, but so far only Georgia, Maryland, and Connecticut have suspended the state gas tax. When it comes to where we're at and where we're going in terms of domestic energy production and the cost of fuel moving forward, we spoke to CEO of Domestic Energy Producers Alliance, Jerry Simmons. Here's a look. Jerry Simmons, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report again.
My pleasure, Steve.
Jerry, I want to talk to you obviously about oil and energy, a major issue in the United States right now. When it comes to the overall big picture, whether it's lowering the cost for the American people at the pump, how important is it to have an oil or energy, a fossil fuel friendly administration, and what impacts does it actually have?
It has huge impacts. I believe that we're seeing that now. The current administration, and I regret that I don't have quotes to read to you, but if you go back to Joe Biden, the candidate, over and over again, he said, we're going to do away with fossil fuels. We're going to end oil and gas. And again, as we all know, on the first day, he X'd out the Keystone XL pipeline. He stopped leases on federal lands. All of those things, they all kind of fed into and led into a really bad 2020 for the domestic oil and gas industry. So as he was coming into his administration, we were seeing shortages as we were coming out of the pandemic, and the U.S. industry wasn't able to kind of pick up that slack and run with it. We've been told that the administration, again, now wants us to produce more in this country. That's only happened in the last couple of months when things got very dire with Ukraine and Russia and the invasion there and the sanctions against Russia and no more importing of that, what was it, 6% of our consumption daily. So it's just been very recent that the administration has come around and asked domestic producers to produce more, after they had already asked the Saudis and the Venezuelans and maybe even the Iranians to produce more.
And by tapping into the U.S. oil, even if other countries want to continue their same amount of production, doesn't that ultimately answer the question of supply and demand and would potentially bring prices down?
It should, absolutely. And we made, as an organization, DEPA made that argument in 2015 about lifting the crude oil export ban in this country that had been in place for about 40 years. What we said was having that U.S. production, because of the shale revolution, we had an excess of production. Having that on the world market would stabilize prices. And actually it did up until this last year.
So Jerry, just switching gears a little bit here, a lot of our elected officials throughout the country, either on the state level or federal level, are suggesting different ways to offset and ease the burden. One example is in California, the governor, instead of reducing or cutting back the fuel tax, wants to offer debit cards for $400 per household per vehicle to ease the burden. Is that a good long-term solution to this problem, in your opinion?
Absolutely not, in my opinion. I think California is a great example. Just a few years ago, and I wish I could tell you the year, Californians were importing, I think it was less than 10% of the oil that they consumed, and mostly in transportation. And today I think that numbers are like 68%. And most of that oil is coming from Saudi Arabia via tanker. So they're floating boats from the Middle East to the west coast of this country to refine a product so that Governor Newsom can not have the production in California, which makes no sense at all. So the drivers in California, when they pull up and they pay $6 a gallon, they can thank those policies for that. That's a direct relation to that. And to offer somebody, you know, a debit card for $400, that's a pretty short-term solution. I mean, what's it going to cost to fill up? If you're a plumber or a carpenter and you've got a Ford F-150 to get to work in, what's that going to cost you? $200 to fill that thing up, a 55-gallon tank. So, you know, that's a drop in the bucket. So yeah, it's a short-term solution to a very serious problem that needs to have policy changes, I believe. That's my opinion.
Jerry Simmons, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
A new bill is aiming to promote accountability and transparency in federal courts, including the Supreme Court. The 21st Century Courts Act requires full disclosure of travel and hospitality-related gifts. Democratic Senators Whitehouse and Blumenthal, as well as Representative Hank Johnson, introduced the bill earlier today.
The court is now allowing its members to accept personal hospitality. I put the word personal in quotes because it's allowed to accept personal hospitality from people the justice has never met at commercial resorts and facilities.
Bill sponsors say that judges and justices must also have increased recusal standards for conflicts of interest.
A Supreme Court justice is now not required to address why he or she doesn't think he or she needs to recuse. And if a party thinks that they really ought to have recused, they have no recourse.
The bill would also require the Supreme Court to develop an ethics code for its justices. President Biden signed into law the Postal Service Reform Act of 2022 today. It's a sweeping bipartisan bill designed to overhaul the United States Postal Service.
All right, it's official. All right.
The USPS has been suffering a net loss year after year. In 2021, it lost close to $5 billion, and in 2020, it lost over $9 billion. This new bill intends to save about $50 billion over the next 10 years. It will reduce the agency's health care costs by repealing pre-funded retiree benefits, which cost $5.5 billion annually. The Biden administration is putting more sanctions on Russia, this time targeting Vladimir Putin's oldest daughters and sending a message to Russian oligarchs. The Justice Department held a briefing this morning to announce the measures. We'll tell you more. As the United States continues to pile on sanctions on top of Russia, could this be pushing Russia closer to an even more dangerous China? Coming up, we'll ask Congressman Byron Donalds. The federal government has stopped all shipping of a COVID drug yesterday. The FDA says the drug does not work against Omicron variant BA2. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. I'm Steve Lance. The U.S. is continuing to sanction Russian banks as well as Russian elites. The latest targets are Russian President Vladimir Putin's 2 adult daughters, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's wife and daughter, and members of Russia's Security Council.
There's nothing less happening than major war crimes. Responsible nations have to come together to hold these perpetrators accountable.
The White House also announced Biden is signing an executive order to prohibit new investment in Russia. This will include any U.S. person or business anywhere in the world. Businesses and individuals will be blocked from transacting with major Russian state-owned enterprises. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned that war in Ukraine will have enormous global economic impact.
Russia's actions, including the atrocities committed against the innocent Ukrainians in Bucha, are reprehensible, represent an unacceptable affront to the rules-based global order, and will have enormous economic repercussions in Ukraine and beyond.
The Justice Department is sending another message to Russian oligarchs connected with the war in Ukraine. Attorney General Merrick Garland said today that his department will use every available tool to disrupt and prosecute oligarchs attempting to evade sanctions.
It does not matter how far you sail your yacht. It does not matter how well you conceal your assets. It does not matter how cleverly you write your malware or hide your online activity. The Justice Department will use every available tool to find you, disrupt your plots, and hold you accountable.
Garland announced an indictment charging Russian oligarch Konstantin Malafeyev with sanctions violations. The indictment alleges the oligarch used his network of allies to acquire and run media outlets across Europe. The Attorney General also announced that the Justice Department is disrupting a global botnet linked to Russia's military intelligence agency. Garland says that thousands of network hardware devices have been infected, but the Justice Department was able to detect and disable the botnet before it could be weaponized. Florida Congressman Byron Donalds has been warning of the treachery of the Chinese Communist Party. Not too long ago, we had a chance to ask him about the dangers of the Russia-Ukraine war, leading to closer ties between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Here's a look at what he had to say. Do you fear that this may have pushed Russia closer to China, who is an even greater adversary, if you will?
Well, first let me say Russia has been tied with China for a very long time because Russia understands that they are not really a threat to us, but them combined with the Chinese, they definitely are. Secondarily, I'm going to say that what's happened here has been actually happening for about a year now. Vladimir Putin just didn't wake up and say, hey, I'm going to invade. He's been talking about this for a couple months now. Why do you think there's been troops on the border of Ukraine, 75,000, 80,000, 85,000, 90,000? This has been a buildup over months, if not almost a year at this point. So we shouldn't be shocked that this has occurred. When Afghanistan fell, our adversaries saw the weakness of America in that moment. And they just started devising their plans, understanding that they were saying, like, look, we have weakness in the White House. We have an ability now to reshape the map. That's exactly what Vladimir Putin is doing. We should have been ahead of this far sooner than we have been. But this is what happens when you have somebody who leads from behind or does not lead at all.
Now, of course, the geopolitical things that are at stake are different when it comes to matching Ukraine and Russia to China and Taiwan. But is there anything we can learn, because it is a relatively similar situation when it comes to China potentially invading Taiwan?
The thing we have to learn is we have to get to the game a lot faster. We need to get there sooner. We should actually be in the game right now. Our entire focus just shouldn't be on Russian sanctions after the fact. It needs to be about what are we going to deploy and how are we going to assist Taiwan with a Chinese government who is actively looking to take them over. Why would they fly 9 planes over their airspace the other day? Why would they do that? Unless they're trying to see what the response would be from America. And if there's going to be no response from America because we're too concerned about putting in sanctions that are too little too late, then the Chinese are just going to move and be more aggressive. This stuff, it really isn't that hard. As a freshman member of Congress, that's what's most frustrating because, I mean, when it comes to geopolitics, this is about strength and the ability to wield it and use it and the ability to talk toughly to your adversaries when need be. We don't have that in the White House right now. So I'm actually very concerned for Taiwan. We need to be standing with them and sending clear messages today, right now, that we're going to do everything in our power to defend them.
Now, Congressman, just switching gears real fast here. When it comes to the issue of critical race theory, we saw that it was a very, compelling issue in the Virginia gubernatorial race. You have the 2022 midterms coming up. Do you see this playing a critical role?
I think it's going to play a role. It's still going to play a role, but the couple key things are going to play bigger roles than even CRT. One is going to be inflation in our economy. This is something that didn't have to happen. This was done by radical overspending by Joe Biden and the Democrats. Number 2 is going to be COVID policy and the complete rejection of the American people of out of control, top-down authoritative COVID policy by the Democrats. Number 3 is going to be safety in our streets. Listen, if you can't have safe streets in a safe community, you can't do anything else. And it is without question that the Democrats took us down this radical road of defunding the police. And when it backfired in the communities of America, the American people have responded vigorously. That's why they're reversing course right now. I think those are going to be the big 3 things that are going to lead into the midterm elections. But it starts with the radical overspending in Washington and, frankly, the lack of leadership and the tone deafness of this administration and of the Democrat Party to the American people.
Congressman Byron Donalds, thank you.
Anytime. Thank you.
And the Justice Department said earlier today that Attorney General Merrick Garland has tested positive for the CCP virus and will be quarantining at home for 5 days. The announcement comes hours after Garland held a news conference in Washington. Garland is the second cabinet official to announce a positive test result on Wednesday. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo also tested positive for the CCP virus using an at-home antigen test. And Assistant House Speaker Catherine Clark also announced she tested positive, all for the CCP virus. She said she's vaccinated and boosted. The U.S. government on April 5th stopped all shipments of a COVID-19 treatment, and the government ordered healthcare providers not to use the drug. The drug is a monoclonal antibody called sotrovimab. The FDA says that data so far indicates that the drug does not work against COVID variant BA2. The U.S. National Public Health Agency says the BA2 subvariant of Omicron makes up over 70% of COVID variants in the country. In a Tuesday statement, the FDA said the monoclonal antibody is no longer authorized to treat COVID-19 in any U.S. region due to increases in the proportion of COVID-19 cases caused by the Omicron BA2 subvariant. Senator Jack Reed and Congressman Eric Swalwell introduced a bill to hold unruly passengers accountable. If the Protection from Abusive Passengers Act becomes law, passengers could be convicted for assaulting flight crew and be placed on a no-fly list. According to the FAA website, there were close to 6,000 incidents in 2021, with over 4,000 of them related to wearing masks. Republican senators argue that this is another incentive to lift the federal mask mandate on airplanes. That's all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you tomorrow.